In our time, anyone who dares to speak about how the world is understood must pass through the gateway of science. There is no longer a path around it. For centuries now, since the early turning of the modern age, scientific thought has quietly, steadily shaped the way humanity thinks, feels, and sees. It has not merely explained the world, it has educated it. To list the victories of science or to measure how deeply it has transformed daily life would be unnecessary. These stories are already written into our machines, our cities, our habits of thought. What truly matters lies elsewhere. What matters is the silent influence science has had on the human soul itself. When we look closely at this influence, we encounter a strange tension, a kind of inner contradiction at the heart of modern consciousness. Let us begin there. In earlier ages, human thinking did not stand apart from the world. When people observed nature, their thoughts moved with it, entered into it, colored it with meaning drawn from within. Human understanding was not a detached observer, but a participant. This can be felt in the forgotten languages of the past, in astrology, in alchemy, where nature was approached as something alive, something that spoke back when thought dared to listen. But this way of knowing has faded. In the modern scientific spirit, we are trained to receive only what can be measured, tested, and repeated. We gather perceptions, and from them we assemble laws, clean, precise, and deliberately untouched by personal interpretation. Thinking is still present, but it is carefully restrained. It arranges, it organizes, it connects what already stands before us. Its task is no longer to reveal meaning, but to remain invisible. And this restraint is considered a virtue. Yet here arises the quiet paradox. What has happened to thinking itself? Once a living bridge between human and world, it has become a servant, a tool that works behind the scenes, useful, efficient, but silent about its own nature. Thought is no longer allowed to speak of itself. It no longer reveals its own reality. In the study of the outer world, thinking is asked to step aside, to humble itself, to withdraw. And the consequences of this withdrawal reach deep into the inner life. For the modern human being, thinking becomes something private, almost hidden, a current flowing inward, while the gaze turns outward toward facts, data, and laws. Thus, when we face the world today, thinking stands back in quiet modesty, retreating into the soul where it waits, no longer a voice in the world, but a silent presence within. And now a deeper question rises before us, one that stands at the very edge of modern understanding. If science has shaped the way we observe the world, how, then, can science turn its gaze toward thinking itself? Here we meet another quiet contradiction. For if thinking is permitted only to arrange natural events, to classify, to combine, to organize, if it may act only as a formal instrument of clarity, then it cannot be counted among the natural processes it observes. And so the question emerges entirely justified from the scientific point of view. How can thinking be understood as an expression of the human organism if it has been methodologically excluded from the very realm of nature? When we stand honestly within the life of modern science, there is only one answer science can presently give. As long as thinking has withdrawn from participation in natural processes, no amount of observation can truly reach it. One may search for thinking within nature, but the search must fail. What is excluded in method becomes excluded in reality, and thus thinking, the very act by which we know, is reduced to an appearance, a reflection without substance, a semblance rather than a living reality. Few people are fully conscious of how powerful this contradiction truly is. Yet in the hidden depths of the human being, it lives quietly in countless souls. For only as thinking beings do we recognize ourselves as human. It is through thinking that we sense our dignity, our worth, our inner sovereignty. And yet, the very faculty that grants us our humanity walks beside us through the world as something whose full reality we are no longer permitted to affirm. When we point to what is highest within us, we feel, as strange as it sounds, as though we are standing on uncertain ground, within something that modern thought has labeled unreal. This experience places a weight upon the soul, especially upon those who have immersed themselves deeply in the methods of physics and biology, and who seek to draw from these methods not isolated results, but a complete understanding of life. Here at this threshold, doubt can arise, sharp and penetrating. It begins in the realm of thought, but it does not remain there. It sinks downward into feeling. Anyone who observes the human being with patience and without prejudice knows this truth. What lives long enough within the inner life eventually imprints itself upon the body. From this bodily disposition, in turn, our mood toward life begins to rise, either as strength or as heaviness. Whether doubt remains confined to thought or seeps into feeling determines the course of a human life. From it depends whether we walk upright through the world, steady in ourselves, a quiet source of health and courage for others, or whether we drift through life embittered, weighed down, unable to serve ourselves or those around us. This condition does not arise inevitably. It need not lead to doubt. But it can, unless science is widened, unless its horizon is extended beyond its current limits. The extraordinary achievements of science in revealing the outer world place equally extraordinary demands upon the human soul. If we take science seriously, and we must, then we must also develop within ourselves a strength capable of meeting doubt with something deeper, firmer, and more powerful than would ever have been required without the immense authority of modern scientific knowledge. And yet, just where science seems to offer something deeply unsettling to the inner life, it reveals something unexpectedly affirmative. Here we encounter the second paradox. This realization came to me with particular force many years ago when I sought to understand human freedom while remaining faithful to a genuinely scientific way of seeing the world. At first glance, science, with its emphasis on lawful necessity, appears to leave no room for freedom at all. Its theories seem to close the door on human self-determination. And yet something remarkable occurs. What science proclaims in theory is quietly overturned by what it cultivates in practice. For when we truly adopt the scientific attitude, not merely repeating its conclusions, but entering earnestly into its discipline of thinking, we begin to experience thought itself as something image-like, pictorial, non-coercive. If thought is not a force, but an image, then it does not compel. A force pushes, presses, demands. An image does none of these things. I may stand before a mirror filled with countless reflections, yet not one of them can force me to act. Images cannot command, only forces can. And when thinking is experienced in its pure, image-like nature, as science itself trains us to do, it ceases to act like a natural power and becomes a field of inner freedom. Now imagine that moral impulses arise within this same realm of pure thinking. Imagine shaping them consciously, with the very clarity and discipline that scientific thinking has taught us. Then these impulses are no longer commands imposed upon us. They are not pressures from within or without. They are images, living guidelines through which we define ourselves. In this sense, even though science may deny freedom according to its premises, it nevertheless educates modern humanity toward freedom. Here stand the two great poles that contemporary science places before the human soul. One touches the life of thought, where thinking retreats from reality. The other touches the life of the will, where freedom quietly awakens. And in recognizing this contrast, we also see how the scientific worldview points beyond its own limits. It cannot avoid forming an attitude toward thinking, and yet it excludes thinking from reality. In doing so, it gestures toward a new path of research, one that can remain fully valid in the eyes of science while leading to a living experience of thinking itself. And it suggests something more. Because science cannot arrive at freedom through theory alone, its attitude must be carried into another domain, a region where freedom can truly be encountered. What I present here is not a rejection of science, but a necessity that arises from science itself, an expansion beyond its present boundaries. This extension, into a realm science has not yet entered, is the task of the worldview I am setting before you. Today, this necessary expansion of knowledge stands only at its beginning. It cannot yet be carried out completely, and yet the attempt cannot be avoided. For the experiences I have described, the quiet reality of thinking and the question of human freedom are awakening in ever more human souls. These questions are no longer confined to laboratories or lecture halls. They no longer belong only to those who work directly within science. Even in the most distant places, in villages untouched by major scientific discoveries, education itself has already shaped the mind according to the demands of scientific thinking. And with this form of thinking, often without awareness, a subtle uncertainty enters, an unspoken question about human freedom. What confronts us here is not merely a scientific concern, it is a human one. The essential question becomes this: standing firmly upon the ground that scientific education has prepared, can we walk further, beyond the limits of contemporary science, without betraying its discipline? The answer is yes. Such a path of knowledge can be attempted with complete intellectual honesty, by methods that can withstand the scrutiny of the most rigorous scientist, and by means that arise fully from the scientific attitude itself. At the beginning of these reflections, I wish to speak of these paths. Yet this way of knowing, though already longed for by many souls, often unconsciously, is not easily captured in concepts. Therefore, in order that we may truly understand one another, I must first turn our attention backward. I will speak, not as doctrines, but as guiding images, of older paths humanity once walked to reach forms of knowledge that lie beyond the domain science usually addresses today. Much of what is now regarded solely as a matter of faith, accepted respectfully as tradition, once arose from genuine acts of knowing. What lives on today as inherited belief emerged in earlier epochs from methods of knowledge appropriate to their time, though no longer suited to modern consciousness. A careful and unbiased study of history reveals this. Everything that contemporary humanity considers beyond knowledge and assigns exclusively to faith leads the attentive observer back to ancient periods of human development. There we discover that these truths were once actively sought, consciously cultivated, and inwardly experienced by individuals who developed their souls and awakened latent spiritual capacities. For them, these were not beliefs, they were discoveries. Modern humanity has largely forgotten how much of what now appears as inherited tradition was once found through living paths of knowledge, not invented, not imagined, but discovered by ways of knowing different from our own, yet real for their time. When I speak of these ancient paths of knowledge, I do so with the help of methods that I will describe more fully later. For this reason, those who form their picture of early humanity only from external historical records, and not from the inner documents of the spirit, may feel inclined to object. Yet anyone who approaches even the outward evidence with patience and fairness, and then sets it beside what I shall present, will discover no true contradiction. Let me also be clear about something essential. I do not speak of these older paths in order to recommend them for our time. They belong to earlier stages of human development, and when misunderstood or misapplied today, they can even become harmful. I describe them for one purpose only, so that we may clearly understand one another when we speak of modern paths of knowledge, and so that it becomes evident what kind of inner work is required today if one wishes to move beyond the limits of contemporary scientific understanding. From the great variety of ancient ways of knowing, I will choose only two. Others could just as well be named, but these two will suffice. The first leads us far back to the ancient cultures of the East, to what is known as the path of yoga. Yoga has passed through many transformations. The form in which it has reached later centuries is often a shadow of its original nature, sometimes even distorted, sometimes dangerous. For this reason, historians who look only at its later expressions are often compelled to describe it as something harmful to the human being. But human nature itself has changed again and again across the ages. What once harmonized with the human constitution in ancient epochs could later become unsuitable or even destructive. Practices that were once genuine paths to knowledge were, in later times, sometimes reduced to tools for satisfying the hunger for power over others. This was not the case in the earliest periods of the yoga path I am describing. So what did this ancient path truly involve? Among many disciplines, it included specific forms of breathing practice. From the wide range of exercises known to the ancient yogi, I will single out breathing alone. In our ordinary modern life, breathing takes place largely without awareness. As long as we are healthy, we scarcely notice it at all. Only illness draws our attention to it. And the more quietly and regularly breathing carries on its work, the better it is for everyday consciousness and daily life. But for the ancient practitioner who sought to awaken faculties lying dormant in ordinary awareness, the process of breathing was transformed. The rhythm of inhaling, of holding the breath, and of exhaling was deliberately altered, extended, shortened, and shaped by conscious intention. Why was this done? So that breathing itself could enter consciousness. Ordinary breathing remains unnoticed, but a rhythm guided by human will becomes fully awake. And what follows from this? Even in simple physiological terms, we can grasp what was taking place. With each breath in, a living impulse enters the organism. This impulse does not stop in the lungs. It travels upward through the spinal pathways into the brain itself. There, the rhythm of breathing interweaves with the processes that carry our life of thought, the nerve and sense activities. In truth, our thinking is never purely neural. It is always permeated quietly and continuously by the rhythm of breath. What the ancient yogi accomplished was to bring this hidden partnership between breath and thought into full awareness. Whenever human thinking unfolds, a quiet harmony is already at work. The rhythms of breath and the processes of perception interweave without our awareness. Thinking never moves alone. It is always accompanied by the subtle music of respiration. The ancient practitioner learned to bring this hidden harmony into consciousness. By deliberately shaping the rhythm of breath and allowing it to flow knowingly into the processes of perception and thought, the yogi united breathing and thinking with full awareness. The rhythm of inhalation and exhalation became inwardly aligned with the rhythm of logic, with the inner movement of connecting and separating thoughts. Through this, the entire life of thought was transformed. And in what direction? Because breathing had become conscious, thought itself began to permeate the whole organism, just as breath does. Thoughts no longer hovered abstractly. They lived. They moved through the inner currents of the body. One could say that the yogi set thought upon the waves of breath, and within the inner rhythm of his being experienced himself as filled with thinking that flowed and lived. Through this transformation, the yoga practitioner rose beyond the ordinary level of human consciousness and was able to speak from a form of knowing that others could not yet reach. To understand what was truly taking place, we must briefly turn our gaze to how knowledge itself was experienced by humanity at that time. In the modern world, we place great value on clarity of perception, on pure colors, pure tones, and precisely defined sensory qualities. We strive to separate perception from meaning, experience from interpretation. This was not the case for earlier civilizations. It is a misunderstanding to believe that ancient peoples merely projected fantasies onto the natural world. Their imagination was not unusually uncontrolled. Rather, their mode of perception was different. They did not encounter color without spirit, nor sound without soul. In every phenomenon, sun and moon, wind and weather, spring and flowing stream, plant, animal and star, they perceived a living spiritual presence. Where modern humanity sees isolated sensory impressions and later seeks connections through abstract thought, earlier humanity perceived meaning directly. This had a profound consequence. The strong, sharply defined self-consciousness we experience today had not yet arisen. The human being did not experience himself as separate from the world, but as belonging to it, woven into the fabric of nature itself. To offer an image, if the hand were conscious, it would not imagine itself as an independent being. It would know itself only through its place within the whole organism. In a similar way, the human being of ancient times did not experience the self as an isolated center, but as a living part of a world permeated by soul and spirit. The yogi, however, rose beyond this natural immersion. By uniting thinking with the conscious rhythm of breath, a process that fills the entire inner being, he achieved a new experience. Through this inward discipline, a clearer awareness of the human self emerged. A consciousness of the I began to stand out from the surrounding world. And in this awakening, the human being first approached a true comprehension of the self. What feels natural and unquestioned to us today, the quiet certainty of being a self, the inner sense of I, was not given so easily to human beings of earlier ages. What we inherit through our constitution and refine through education had to be reached indirectly in ancient times, through long and disciplined inner practice. And because of this, the experience of self was entirely different. There is a great difference between receiving something as a natural fact of life and arriving at it through deliberate inner transformation. The human being of ancient civilizations lived immersed in the movements of the universe. They felt what surged, what flowed, what acted in the world around them. Today we stand at a distance. We observe from above, from separation, and the universe no longer speaks to us directly. For the ancient yogi, selfhood, the true human soul, revealed itself only through inner discipline, and what was discovered in this way did not remain private. It flowed outward into the shared consciousness of humanity and became the substance of its greatest spiritual creations. One luminous example has come down to us from the ancient East, the song known as the Bhagavad Gita. Within its verses lives the experience of awakening self-awareness. In profound and lyrical tones, it speaks of a self that, once truly experienced, leads the human being into sympathy with the whole of existence. The Gita reveals how self-knowledge opens the door to genuine humanity and to a living relationship with higher, spiritual, supersensible worlds. Again and again, in ever-renewed harmonies, it sings of the self devoting itself to the all. To the careful student of history, who can inwardly enter those ancient epochs, it becomes clear these radiant expressions arose from experiences gained through disciplined paths of cognition. Such a way of knowing belonged to an earlier stage of human civilization in the East. At that time, it was widely accepted that anyone seeking contact with supersensible realms had to withdraw from ordinary life, into solitude, into the life of the hermit. Those who undertook such practices accepted isolation as their destiny. For these exercises awakened a heightened sensitivity, one that could no longer endure the roughness of everyday existence. Life itself had to be left behind. And yet, in those ancient times, it was precisely such solitary figures who were trusted. What they spoke was received as knowledge. This no longer suits our age. Today, we rightly expect that anyone claiming insight should stand within life, able to meet its demands, to work, to act, to endure the weight of reality as it presents itself in human labor and social responsibility. Modern humanity no longer feels inwardly connected to those who must withdraw from life in order to know. If we reflect honestly upon this, we are led to a clear conclusion. The paths of knowledge for our time must be different. We will speak of them shortly. But before doing so, purely for clarity, and not as a recommendation, I wish to point briefly to another ancient path, the path of asceticism. This way involved the deliberate weakening of bodily processes and needs, dulling the natural vitality of the human organism. Through deprivation, through pain, through imposed hardship, the body was subdued. And from this subduing arose certain inner experiences that did indeed lead to forms of knowledge. Yet this must be clearly understood. It is not the task of modern humanity to suppress or injure the healthy human organism. We are born into earthly life in order to live within it, to make the body effective, capable, and fully present in the world of human activity. The healthy human organism is perfectly suited to the sensory world, to life as it unfolds between birth and death. This is not in doubt, and yet it remains true that those early ascetics who deliberately subdued the body did gain something real, a direct experience of the soul, and with it, the certainty of dwelling within a spiritual world. What makes our physical organism so effective for earthly life is precisely what veils that spiritual world from us. This was the clear experience of those early seekers. When bodily functions were quieted, the spiritual realm entered consciousness. But this is no longer a viable path. Anyone who suppresses the body in this way today does not gain wisdom. They lose their capacity for life. They become unfit both for themselves and for the world they must live in. Our age does not call for withdrawal. It calls for human beings who remain healthy, who restore balance when it is lost, who stand firmly within the full demands of existence. A path that requires retreat from life cannot inspire confidence today. Not because it once lacked truth, but because the soul of our age has changed. Asceticism once led to knowledge. It cannot do so now. Yet what both ancient yoga and ascetic discipline once revealed of supersensible worlds has not vanished. It lives on as sacred tradition, as inherited spiritual content, quietly answering deep needs of the human soul. Few people today realize that what they accept as articles of faith were once discoveries, found through genuine paths of knowledge, though paths no longer suited to our time. The modern path must be different. We have seen how yoga sought thinking indirectly, by leading it through the rhythm of breath, so that thought could be experienced more deeply than in ordinary life. We can no longer take this detour. Our task is to transform thinking itself directly. Through this transformation, a new extension of knowledge becomes possible, one that grows naturally from our understanding of nature. If we understand ourselves rightly, we must begin here. Not by altering breath, but by strengthening thought, by making it more awake, more concentrated, more alive than it is in everyday consciousness. Ordinary thinking is largely passive. It follows events. It drifts with impressions. To enter a supersensible path of knowledge, we place clear, simple concepts at the very center of awareness, and we remain within them. Not many concepts. 1. I know that some believe this already exists in later forms of yoga, but in the way yoga is practiced today, this is no longer the case. The human organism has changed. The same exercises would now produce different effects, and so we turn directly to thinking itself. We cultivate meditation by concentrating on chosen thoughts for defined periods of time. In the soul, we do something akin to strengthening a muscle. A muscle grows through repeated effort. So does thinking. Instead of allowing thought to be pulled along by external events, we bring into consciousness a thought we fully understand, one we have formed ourselves or received with clarity, and we hold it there without distraction. We shut out everything else. All attention, all inner experience is devoted not to the content itself, but to the act of thinking. It appears simple, and yet the simple is difficult. For some, this requires weeks. For others, months. Gradually, consciousness learns to rest again and again on the same thought, until the content becomes indifferent and all that matters is the strengthening of inner activity. Then, something remarkable occurs. We achieve the opposite of the ancient yogic process. Instead of binding thinking more deeply into the body, we release it. Thinking is gently torn free from the remnants of breath that unconsciously permeate ordinary thought. Today, this may sound strange, even fantastic. Yet just as the ancient yogi drove thinking inward into the rhythms of breath to experience the self, so we now liberate thinking from the body to encounter the spirit. Through systematic practice, one gradually succeeds not only in separating thought from breathing, but in freeing it entirely from bodily dependence. Only then do we recognize the unexpected service rendered by the so-called materialistic worldview. It revealed a truth. Ordinary thinking rests upon bodily processes, and from this realization arises the impulse to seek a thinking that no longer does. Such thinking cannot be imagined. It must be built step by step from ordinary thought itself. In this way, we arrive at a thinking free of corporeality, a thinking composed purely of soul activity. At first, it appears only as image, but these images reveal something new, life independent of the body. This is the first step on a path of knowledge suited to modern humanity, and it leads us to an experience that lies hidden from ordinary consciousness. Just as the ancient yogi bound his thinking to the inward rhythm of breath, and through that rhythm to the spiritual self dwelling within, so we, in our time, move in the opposite direction. He turned inward. We turn outward. By gently tearing logical thinking away from its habitual bond with the body, we allow thought to step beyond the organism and enter the wider rhythm of the world itself. Only then do we discover that such a rhythm exists. As the yogi awakened consciousness of the body's inner cadence, so we awaken, spiritually, to a rhythm that lives outside us, beneath the surface of all things. If I may speak in images, in ordinary awareness, we connect thoughts logically, using them as tools to interpret the sensory world. But now, thinking enters a different element, something like music, yet unmistakably a form of knowing. We begin to sense a spiritual rhythm underlying reality. We do not merely observe the world, we begin to perceive it from within the spirit. Thinking, once abstract and lifeless, once no more than a sequence of images, awakens. It becomes alive. This is the decisive transition from dead, mechanical thought to a living thinking that carries within it the power to shape reality. Just as we experience our own growth as something living, so now we feel that thinking itself has become a living process. With this enlivened thinking, we can penetrate nature more deeply than ordinary thought ever allows. Let me offer an example drawn from modern life. We direct our abstract thinking toward an animal, observing, experimenting, analyzing. We construct a mental image, skeleton, musculature, the interweaving of life processes. Then we turn to the human being and create a second image, bones, muscles, organs, the flow of vitality. We compare these two images externally. If our thinking follows a Darwinian line, we interpret the human being as the physical descendant of the animal. If our inclination is more spiritual, we imagine the relationship differently. That debate is not the point. What matters is this. Because our thinking is abstract and lifeless, we cannot allow the image of the animal to transform itself inwardly into the image of the human being. Instead, we extract both images from sensory observation and compare them afterward. But when thinking becomes living, something entirely different occurs. We still form an image, but now it is alive. The skeleton, the musculature, the flow of life are grasped as a living structure. And because the thought itself is alive, we can follow it inwardly and allow it to grow. The thought of the animal becomes the thought of the human being, not by comparison, but by transformation. I can only hint at this through an analogy. Consider a magnetic needle. It comes to rest only when aligned with the north-south direction of the Earth's magnetic field. All other directions are indifferent. For living thinking, this becomes an experience of space itself. Space is no longer an empty arrangement of positions, as it is for abstract thought. It becomes inwardly articulated, filled with meaning and direction. And so we begin to understand why the animal spine lies predominantly horizontal, parallel to the surface of the Earth. Where this is not the case, the deviation is not accidental. It points to deeper laws at work. The human being, however, raises the spine vertically, lifting himself into a new orientation within the universe. This difference is not trivial. If we were to rotate the animal form upright, we would have to transform every other organ as well. Through a single act, a 90-degree turn from horizontal to vertical, thought becomes alive. And through this inner movement we pass, not outwardly but inwardly, from animal form to human form. By immersing ourselves in the rhythms of natural processes, we reach the spiritual element that underlies them. And from there we penetrate even more deeply into nature's inner becoming. Living thinking grants us access to growth, to transformation, to the unfolding of the world itself. We return, consciously, to secrets of existence from which humanity once departed when self-awareness first arose, when the I turned outward and the sense of I was born. At this point, a serious objection may arise. One might say, have there not been thinkers who claim to possess this so-called living thinking, and has not modern science rightly distanced itself from such approaches? Indeed, the present age, with its demand for rigor, has turned away from what once appeared as living philosophy, as in the works of thinkers like Schelling or early natural philosophers. And yet, that turning away does not invalidate the reality of living thinking itself. It only marks the task now placed before us, to rediscover it with full clarity, discipline, and consciousness worthy of our time. I stand in agreement with those who raise this objection. There is indeed something dreamlike, something detached from lived reality, in the way certain thinkers took images drawn from external nature, animated them inwardly, and then projected them back onto the world, as though this alone allowed one to think along with nature. So long as living thinking remains only at this pictorial level, it offers no firm ground. Even enlivened thought by itself cannot guarantee reality. Something more is required. Only when exercises of thought are joined by exercises of the will does living thinking gain the weight and gravity of spiritual truth. Let us be honest with ourselves. If we look back 10 or 20 years, we must admit that the inner content of our soul life has changed profoundly. In many ways, we have become different people. Yet this transformation mostly occurred passively, shaped by heredity, by surroundings, by education, and later by the pressures of life itself. Anyone who seeks knowledge of spiritual reality must take hold of this process consciously. Through an inner schooling, a disciplined training of the will, we begin to shape ourselves inwardly instead of allowing the world alone to shape us. The specific exercises need not concern us now. What matters is their direction. Just as life imposes habits upon us, we can deliberately adopt new qualities of character. The most fruitful are those that demand years of effort. Qualities that require continuous attention, repeated resolve, and the steady strengthening of will. When we begin to form ourselves in this way, becoming, in part, what the world would otherwise make of us, the living thoughts we have cultivated through meditation take on a new character. They become inwardly painful. They enter the soul as trials, as quiet suffering. And in truth, no one reaches higher knowledge without passing through this region. Pain and suffering are not obstacles on the path, they are thresholds. They must be endured, overcome, and finally transformed until we stand before them again with inner freedom. What is taking place here can be sensed through an image. Consider the human eye. When light and color strike it, they alter its inner physical state. Earlier humanity experienced these changes as discomfort, as mild pain. We do not notice this today only because our constitution has grown more robust, more indifferent. Yet in truth, all sensory perception rests upon a foundation of pain. In a similar way, when living thoughts permeate the soul, they do so painfully. But this pain does not damage the body as ascetic practices once did. The body remains healthy, fit for ordinary life. The suffering unfolds inwardly in the soul itself. Anyone who has advanced even a little on this path will tell you, the joy life has given me, I accept with gratitude, but what I know I owe to my suffering. Thus, life itself prepares the seeker, for part of the journey demands the conquest of pain, and when this pain is overcome, something remarkable occurs. The soul itself becomes an organ of perception, not a physical sense, but a spiritual one, a soul organ, a spirit organ, and through it, we begin to perceive the spiritual world as directly as we see and hear the physical world through our ordinary senses. Just as sensory experience confirms the reality of the outer world, so after suffering has been transformed, the spiritual world confirms itself to the awakened soul. This mode of perception, disciplined, sober, exact, is what I would call a modern, exact clairvoyance, not fantasy, not dream, but a precise form of spiritual seeing born from inner work, strengthened by will and tempered by suffering. Modern spiritual science. Unlike the ancient, hazy arts of clairvoyance, which belong to the shadows of the past, today we can reach with precision into the eternal essence of humanity. We can touch the very meaning of immortality, to glimpse what lies beyond birth and death. Yet this exploration belongs to another time, another lecture, where we shall speak of the soul's intimate connection to this worldview. Today I wish to show a different path, a modern, supersensible path of knowledge. The yogi sought inward, penetrating the self hidden within man. The ascetic sought to squeeze the spirit free by suppressing the body, lifting the soul from life itself. We, in contrast, move outward. We cultivate powers of knowledge that lie dormant within the soul, and through them we touch the rhythm of the world. We do not punish the body, we do not withdraw from life. We address the soul intimately, within the full living stream of existence. This modern path places the human being fully within life, alive to its pulse, its challenges, its beauty. Whereas ancient yoga and asceticism pulled humanity away from the world, we walk through life, but with eyes open to the spiritual currents flowing beneath the visible. Through these exercises, we extend our awareness, reaching deeper into the very being of nature. This path is no opposition to science. It is born from the same rigorous inquiry. It honors the discipline of observation, the quest for truth, and cultivates it as a faculty within the human soul. Science seeks exactness, particularly through mathematics, because the world it measures lies outside us. We touch it only by bringing something inward, a certainty born of the mind itself. We represent this certainty in numbers, diagrams, equations, but what matters is not the paper or symbol. It is the experience of truth within, the marriage of inner perception and outer observation. Mathematics gives us mastery over the inorganic world. It lets us measure, predict, and comprehend the processes of lifeless matter. But when we approach the living, the organic, we require a different tool, an inward seeing as precise, as disciplined as mathematics itself, but alive. Through living thinking, we shape forms and structures in the soul, not as numbers and symbols, but as a qualitative mathematics of life itself, reaching into realms that ordinary tools cannot touch. It is here that art and science converge, for only by this living cognition do we penetrate what is hidden in the organic, in the vibrant, breathing world. Just as the external senses show the human form, yet cannot reveal the soul within, so does ordinary science reveal the world's surface, its gestures, its forms, its patterns. To reach deeper, we must penetrate beyond the outward expression, beyond the motions, to the spiritual essence underlying all phenomena. Spiritual science does not oppose natural science. It honors its findings, its rigor, its beauty. But it adds a new dimension: the soul, the spirit of the world, seen, understood, and engaged through disciplined knowledge. As we walk this path, we do not leave life behind. We do not punish or withdraw from our bodies. We strengthen thinking, refine perception, and allow the soul itself to see, the eternal element in which we participate, the spiritual pulse beneath all natural law, the invisible rhythm of existence that binds humanity to the cosmos. Spiritual science, then, is not a rival of external science. It is its complement, its inner vision, its soul.